The truth is, no generation of Americans, no generation of self-governing people have had better technology. The internet, information technology, and GIS to give them the ability to model, measure, and map dynamic changing systems. Whether that system is a highway system, whether it's the waters of the largest estuary in North America, the Chesapeake Bay, whether it's where crime is happening in a city or a state, no people have had better technology to model, measure, and map those systems. And also to model, measure, and map the actions and the dollars we invest and we intend to change for the better those systems in order to better serve people. So with that as a tee up, the next guy you're going to hear from is Tim Luzano at Grant Thornton, unless someone else is going to introduce him. Am I okay with this, Cecilia? Okay. So I've worked with Tim as he's developed in this time post George Floyd of heightened awareness about just how much further we still have to go to overcome the legacy of racial injustice, of slavery, of all of the violence attendant with that, whether it's the violence of economic systems or the violence of other systems. And so Tim has put together, done some pretty cool work, largely with open data, but with some predictive analytics and the other cool stuff that Grant Thornton can do to apply that equity lens to transportation solutions, to mobility solutions, to the allocation of grant dollars, so that we don't have to trust some person on high. We can see for ourselves whether in fact our efforts are landing on the right targets of opportunity that make us a country not only of, by, and for the people, but one where there's actually liberty and justice for all. So with that, let me turn it over to Tim to talk about this equity lens and transportation modeling, measuring, and mapping. Tim?
Awesome. Alrighty. Thank you again, Governor. And for today's presentation, I really wanted to focus on applying an equity lens on key performance metrics, developing dynamic dashboards to measure KPIs, leverage GIS capabilities to identify underserved communities, identify specific actions that can be taken to improve racial equity, and taking an agile approach to implementing these solutions. So let's take a look at what we've built. As I open up the portal, the first thing you see here is a landing page regarding a strategic plan for Metropolis DOT. And we are currently engaging with a potential new client regarding this equity solution, and they have told us they prefer not to share their name or logo, but I think you all are pretty smart to quickly figure out where Metropolis is. So Metropolis DOT has 6 different pillars of focus, one of which is equity. And so one of Grant Thornton's differentiators is that we take an agile approach to their strategic plan. First, we will tackle the equity pillar, which I am focusing on today, and then we will create the content for the other pillars in different sprints. For example, after we complete equity, we will move to health and safety and add those items to its backlog, finish that sprint, and then move on to the next pillar. But for today's demo, I strictly want to focus on equity. So I'm going to click on this equity card. Let this scroll down just a little bit. At the top, you can see I've called out 3 performance metrics pertaining to equity. And for today's demo, I want to focus on goal number 2 to apply MDOT's equity framework to how MDOT pursues and allocates resources. And for goal number 2, the measurement for success is increasing investments in underserved communities. And so here's our first dashboard that we built. And the vision is to identify if we are investing in projects in underserved communities, which ties directly back to the objective of goal number 2. Just a quick item of note before we dive into the dashboard, all of this data for this demo is publicly available data or is from Esri's data enrichment databases for demographics. So walking through the dashboard, the map on the left shows the city of Metropolis broken down into council districts. I would like to emphasize we can slice and dice the boundaries into any view a prospective client would like, such as a county view, a zip code view, or even a census tract view. And we have provided a couple of different viewpoints throughout this demo to showcase that ability. Next, we did a cross-reference analysis showing council districts with a high diversity index score, along with households below the poverty level. So quickly, the diversity index represents the likelihood that 2 persons chosen at random from the same area belong to different race or ethnic groups. So I'm going to pull up the legend and walk you through that. So if you take a look at the diamond, as we traverse up the right side from this light shade of yellow to this darker shade of blue, we'll have a higher concentration of households below the poverty level. If we go up the left side of the diamond from the light shade of yellow to this darker shade of yellowish green, that's where we have a high diversity index. But what we're really concerned with is this area of dark green where we have a high diversity index and a high concentration of households below the poverty level. So I hope that makes sense. But let's focus on one of these council districts. And today I'm going to focus on council district number 10. So notice how our map dynamically zoomed, highlighted, and selected council district 10 data. As you can see, we have 89 projects in council district 10, which are identified by the red lines on the map. And then the district has a high diversity index score of 92.2 and impacts 20,000 households below the poverty level. So bringing it back more strategically, the objective of this dashboard is to provide transparency for the general public to see if MDOT is investing in projects in underserved communities. Scrolling down the page a little bit more, this next area allows us to drill down even further into analyzing equity by specific communities. Here we have sliced the data by BIPOC, or Black, Indigenous, People of Color. Personally, I think this is the part of our analysis that really resonates with people, as they want to know, how are you impacting me? So if this site were public facing, I as a Pacific Islander, I could click on this Asian population card and see what specific projects are impacting me in my neighborhood. But for today's demo, we're going to focus on the African American community. So I will click on this Black population card and let my page load up. All right. And so while this is loading, the dashboard follows the same approach of analyzing projects by council district. However, this view focuses specifically on the African American community. Once again, we cross-reference African American households with the households below the poverty line. As you can see, the same choropleth map applies, as the dark shade of green has a high African American household population and a high concentration of households below the poverty level. So let's focus on Council District 8 this time. So I will select Council District 8. And then as you can see, there are, there we go. There are 188 projects directly impacting 40,000 African American households and an African American population of 99,000. So scrolling down again, we wanted to analyze the data even more and cross-reference equity with other strategic initiatives that impact underserved communities in a meaningful way, such as education, health and safety, economic development, and COVID-19. We at Grant Thornton understand the importance of education, and it's especially near and dear to my heart, as I am very passionate about education. So we cross-cut equity with education for our next analysis. So I'll click on this education card and let this page load up. So MDOT has an awesome initiative called Dash Pass. And so Dash Pass lets students ride Dash buses to and from school for free. And so the objective of this dashboard is to identify areas in underserved communities to add additional bus stops or routes to provide an equitable transportation source for kids to go to school. And so for this view, we examined Metropolis by council district and layered on a cross-reference of our African American households living in areas below the poverty level. Some other KPIs we've included are the count of Dash routes, Dash stops, the African American households, as well as a percent of African American males and females aged 15 to 19, since I'm focused on high school kids for today's demo. And I do want to know MDOT is striving explicitly to provide equitable means for women, girls, and gender minorities. So let's take a look at a dark green area again. I'm going to focus again on our friends over at Council District number 10. So I will select Council District 10. As you can see, the dashboard updated, and we have 8 Dash routes and 195 Dash stops impacting 31,000 African American households. And additionally, from our gender viewpoint, there are 51% females and 49% males that are being impacted. But let's try to actively identify where we can start to add Dash routes to provide equitable access to transportation. So I'm going to turn on some layers where I want to see where all my Dash stops are, my Dash routes, and then where are all my public high schools. Let that come up, let that load. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can see. All right, so making some assumptions about the current infrastructure, now the map clearly identifies an equitable transportation desert in the upper northwest area of this council district, an area where MDOT can improve equitable transportation resources for African American high school kids by adding a Dash route or stop. So for example, we can clearly tell them, if you just add a dash route along this area, now these kids will not have to walk, if we make some assumptions, more than a mile just to have access to this high school. Scrolling down a little bit, let me zoom in on my map just to get it teed up. All right, so this next example follows the same approach, but from a different viewpoint. And for this analysis, we focused on the city metropolis, but by neighborhood service area this time. And then we cross-referenced it by high Black population and households below the poverty level again. Next, we plotted all the dash bus stops and added a roughly half a mile walking distance zone from the bus stop, which you can see by the blue area around the pink dots. The idea here is it allows us to analyze areas where we can add more bus stops so individuals don't have to walk so far just to catch a bus to go to school. And additionally, for a future project in a different sprint, we could take this view one step further and analyze walking patterns, given we had access to the data through high crime neighborhoods, and determine if kids have to either A, risk their life by walking through a high crime neighborhood, or B, see if they're walking long distances just to avoid those areas to catch a bus to go to school. So I'm going to toggle back to my home screen. Oh, it didn't refresh, so let me just hit refresh really fast so I can see my home button. There we go. All right. The next part of this demo covers a little bit of our agile approach, as I wanted to cover other pillars in MDOT's strategic plan, but cross-cut it to equity. As you can see, I've added some viewpoints regarding some initiatives on how health and safety, economic development, and sustainability impact equity. So let's take a look at health and safety this time. So I'll click that card. And for today's demo, we wanted to focus on goal number 3, increase the share of people walking and biking to support healthy communities. So I'll click on this circle right here. And I will scroll down and let my dashboard load. All right, while that's loading, for this dashboard, we took the city metropolis and are analyzing it at the census tract level. Let me zoom in on the map just a little bit. All right. So we're analyzing at the census tract level this time. Then we are applying a layer by race. And so the darker the shade of purple, the greater the diversity by race. Next, we've added a layer of bike paths in metropolis, designated by the dark blue lines. And then lastly, we've added a half a mile buffer to see how many households are within a half a mile buffer zone from this to have access to the bicycle infrastructure by the light shade of blue. Examining this data helps us answer questions about bike infrastructure access by population. As you can see to the KPIs on the right, we have the percent of population, we have the count of bike lanes, we have a total population, and then lastly, and most importantly, we have a chart on the bottom right showing the percent of population by race. And so if I'm just going to play around in the map, I'll zoom in around the area of Council District 10 that I talked about earlier. Now we can clearly see that the African-American population have about 32% access to the bike lanes in this portion of metropolis. So the idea for this dashboard is to address questions such as how many citizens are within a half a mile to bicycle infrastructure. We can examine areas where there is not coverage and can identify potential areas to add bike infrastructure to enable safer and healthier travel options. We can also address questions such as, is our city providing equitable access to each community in the city? And then the dashboard also provides insight on different populations' access to bike infrastructure compared to their percent of the total population. And then for my last analysis, we wanted to analyze another pillar or sprint, sustainability. So I'll click on this guy right here. And then once again, we have listed all the goals related to sustainability. And we wanted to focus on goal number 3 to increase equitable, affordable mobility options, especially where our choices are limited. We scroll down and zoom in on the dashboard so you can see. All right. And so as you can see on the map in the dashboard, we've plotted designated DOCLA zones in the city of Metropolis. We have defined mobility equity zones in green. We have the pink zones are transportation disadvantaged. And as you can see from the map, with the larger the orange circles and to the bar chart on the left, the majority of the trips are not coming from our underserved communities. We have a big circle over in downtown LA and Santa Monica Pier, which makes sense, but not so much on the north side where our underserved communities are. So this allows us to visually see where MDOT can add more DOCLA stations to better serve underserved communities. And once again, this is a perfect area where if we had access to trip data such as where the trips are started and ended, we could analyze trip routes to further understand travel patterns such as, Are people in underserved communities using the scooters to get to a train station because it's over a mile away just so they can get to work? Well, that's all I have for today's demo. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope it was engaging and informative.